Welcome back to Seek Strength and welcome back to the Seekistan News Show. Yes, we've moved office. No, this is not the final studio. It will look better. Just give us a break, okay? So today's news show is brought to you, of course, by the Seek Strength app, but also by the Seek Strength newsletter. Head over to seekstrength.com. Wait for the pop-up to show up and sign up to the newsletter there. All of this stuff going on at Seek Strength. There will be sub-newsletters coming soon. Keep an eye out for those. Weightlifting, strength training, S&C, all that good stuff. We put a lot of work into newsletters and we're going to put a lot more work in the future. Now, first up, we've got Carlos Nazar snatching 170 kilos in the morning at the Worlds in Bahrain. And then in the evening, he snatched 170 kilos again. He also did front squats and snatch pulls in the morning. And then in the evening, he did deadlifts and back squats. Because, you know, why do a training week when you can do a whole training day?
Last week and for the last number of weeks, we've spoken about Carlos staying in pretty good shape. I feel like this level of concurrent specific training is bringing it to a whole other level. This is beyond the realms of what we normally expect someone to be doing, particularly so close to competition. Obviously, 170 for Carlos isn't up near those maximal weights. He's probably 18, 19 kilos away from what he could eventually do at this competition. But still, these are excessively heavy weights, up around 87% of 1 rep max. And to be doing them twice in one day means he's obviously in pretty insane shape leading into this Worlds. I think there's a lot of people with a lot of things to prove at this Worlds, and some of them will be coming up later in the show. But certainly I think Carlos will be using this as a way of rubber stamping him as the number one right now.
I just wanted to say it again. Looking at this, I am worried for Carlos staying in the weightlifting community. I am just apprehensive. We've seen this a lot before. If you've been around weightlifting for a while, you'll have seen this happen. History repeats itself. And I just hope we don't lose Carlos to a little holiday. Now, here we've got Miso Hasona, someone who definitely has something to prove. 2020 Olympics, 2021 Olympics in Tokyo, Olympic gold medalist, bombed out in Paris, much to our dismay. Definitely coming back for some big lifts. Here we've got a 220 kilo clean and jerk in the training hall 6 days before the competition as a 102. Now, you remember he competed as a 96 in Tokyo, a very sharp, very fast lifter. We never really got to see what he was capable of in Paris because he bombed out on the snatches. His clean and jerks looked really strong, and it's undoubtedly his best lift. His best is 232 kilos as a 96. So I have to imagine all going well over the next couple of years. Miso's a very young lifter. He's likely to see him clean and jerk well into the 230s, early 230s perhaps, all going well, or certainly has the capability of doing that. He's really strong. He's technically very consistent on the clean and jerk, and he seems to really enjoy doing clean and jerks. It's one of his kind of favourite lifts. So it'll be really interesting to see what number he puts up this year at Worlds. And like Lara said, something to prove, which is good for viewers. And good for his own motivation too, I think.
Miso is definitely growing into this weight class, I feel. Every time we see him, whether it's training videos, whether it was prep for the Olympics or at this point prep for the Worlds, he seems to be in more and more dominant shape. So as he went up in the weight class, just in the kind of year as he went up, he talked about feeling a bit slower, or that the extra weight made his lifts feel a bit slower. And certainly it seems as though that speed, that sharpness Owen mentioned earlier, is coming back in spades. Now, a visual representation of this is his physique. He looks very, very strong. He looks absolutely yacked. I'd love to see some heavier snatches this week, just to see how they're looking, just to see what the relative weights are going to be. But I have no doubt he's going to pull something massive out of the bag.
Next up, we've got the return of the Artem Antropov section of the new show. And he's here in the training hall competing as a 102 in 6-7 days. And he's done 220 kilo clean and jerk singles for 2 singles with that. Artem's snatch is definitely his weaker lift. I'd imagine we're going to see him snatch somewhere around 170s, maybe 180 would be a very, very big day for him on the snatch. But his clean and jerk is certainly where he shines. A lot of that comes from his exceptional timing and also from his massive squatting ability, which is one of the things he's known for. One of the biggest ever squats in weightlifting with 322 kilos, although I suspect he's probably done more than that at the moment. You know, certainly if you look at those heavyweights who squat at 320 plus, that's not a massive number, and he puts up those clean and jerks to back it. These 220s for singles, in comparison to Miso's just before this, do look exceptionally light. This looks like someone who's going to open with 220 and jump well into the 230s. They, of course, have a point to prove. They didn't make the Olympics. Some unfortunately contaminated chicken and horse meat, I believe, precluded them from going there due to some adverse analytical findings. Fortunately for weightlifting fans, they're back, and I'm really excited to see one of my favourite lifters, along with Nargusa, doing some big lifts. So then these 220 kilo clean and jerks hopefully are a sign of something good to come.
You know, I think as fans of weightlifting, we're always somewhat disappointed when people don't make it to big competitions. Obviously, we would have loved to have seen Artem lifting at the Olympics. We always want to see the best athletes in the sport lifting at the biggest competitions against one another. It obviously pulls up the overall standard and leads to much more impressive competitions. But for the athletes themselves, dropping one or two of those bigger competitions certainly can be somewhat beneficial, and particularly when you take someone like Artem, who is that bit younger. They are still on the way up. Obviously they have insane strength numbers, but all of those physical aspects of development can improve a hell of a lot better when you're not constantly peaking and constantly having to go to large scale competitions. There are other side effects of having to go to those larger competitions and maybe get out of your standard training cycles. And I think what we're going to see at this Worlds is some of those people who missed out, not so much the people who missed out on having good Olympic performances, but more so missed out on going to the actual games themselves. I think we're going to see some absolutely astronomical numbers, some diabolical numbers.
Next, we've got Ruslan Nurdinov, who is an OG of international weightlifting, someone who hasn't missed a lot of competitions. He is clean and jerking 230 kilos. He'll be competing as a 109 kilo lifter for Uzbekistan. He has the current world record with 241, which he did in 2021. And this 230 kilos looks pretty casual. Unfortunately, we're unlikely to see Uzbekistan after this competition for a few years. I think they've had too many positive drug tests this year, which means they'll likely be banned unless they can come up with some kind of political shenanigans, which I hope they will. I'll light a candle for those political shenanigans. You know, we want to see Ruslan hit another big clean and jerk, a quad. 2016 Olympic champion, so he is definitely one of the greats in weightlifting. Very interesting style of technique, an interesting build for weightlifting. Maybe not necessarily your stereotypical style of weightlifting build, although it seems like you can make anything work in weightlifting if you try hard enough and you've got the right combination of genetics. He favours a very high hip clean, really long pull, but then he doesn't over pull the barbell. He gets the barbell into that pocket, but he doesn't overextend. He doesn't oversend that barbell too high and let it crash in him. His timing is exceptionally good. Certainly you can't clean and jerk a world record without exceptional timing, and here's some of proof in that pudding with a video from Hook Grip in the training hall.
One really unique thing about Ruslan's technique is the jerk, and particularly the jerk dip. So you'll see it's very, very short. It's also not incredibly aggressive. So a lot of the time as we get lifters lifting heavier and heavier weights, obviously the weight on the end of the barbell has a massive influence over how much potential energy can be stored within the steel. So basically as they drop down and dip into the bottom of that dip and drive, they will bend the bar. The bar will bend around them as they stop. They can then store some of that energy and release it as it's going overhead. Now, in Ruslan's case, he has that shorter dip, but he doesn't necessarily have the speed or the aggression that tends to come along with that very short, aggressive, sharp dip and drive. So it's interesting, he still makes it work incredibly well. It looks like he almost presses the weight overhead, though. It's insane.
Back to Team Kazakhstan, we have Young Charkin, who we saw couple of videos from a few months ago. You may remember from the news shows. He was snatching 170. We thought for a while he was a 73 then, which put them as massive weights, but he's actually competing as an 81 kilo lifter. And we've got two clean and jerks at 200 kilos, both with straps on, and exceptionally fast. He employs quite stereotypical kind of Kazakhstan technique, which is put a lot of power into the barbell. And again, like in the cleans, kind of like the Uzbek neighbours, like Ruslan there, not over pulling the barbell, always getting under nice and fast. Certainly with their lighter lifters, they're very, very fast under the barbell. Always very, very strong lifters as well. And an interesting note on this as well is the use of the straps. Certainly a very wide grip, which typically puts a lot of pressure on elbows, puts a lot of pressure on wrists, puts a lot of pressure on shoulders. And at these weights, it does seem to put a lot of pressure because the sheer weight is going to wear you down. But in Charkin's case, it doesn't seem to be affecting him whatsoever. These are exceptional clean and jerks. These are incredible clean and jerks. at 200 kilos. It's easy to watch the worlds and training halls and be like, yeah, 200 kilo clean and jerk. That's just not that big a deal. But in reality, it's absolutely gigantic. And to see someone manhandling like that as an 81, just never forget how impressive this is.
He is definitely one of the lifters I'm most excited about seeing lift this week. I think the reason it's so exciting is because we haven't really seen a massive amount from him. As Owen said, we saw a number of clips a month or more ago now at this point. But what I really want to see is how he stacks up in competition, how he stacks up against those other lifters in his class. There's obviously a lot of talent there, but I'd love to see how he goes about it, how he goes about that attempt selection, what he's going to look for in the snatch, what he's going to look for in the clean and jerk, and I've no doubt he's in there with a strong chance of a medal.
Here we have a quick clip of him from 1 Kilo's Instagram doing a clean and jerk with 180 kilos. An interesting part of a lot of this training is sometimes we look at the elite weightlifters training in the training hall and are somewhat confused by it. Sometimes, I'll be honest with you, it is kind of dumb. I think it's just fair to say. There's no point beating around the bush. I'm not saying this particular training is dumb, but we'll see people maxing out very heavy pulls, going really heavy on squats, and sometimes the training performance and the competition performance don't line up, and you're looking at the training hall stuff and thinking, what are you doing? Now, he's obviously quite a few days from competition, and 2 + 1, 180 is obviously pretty light for him compared to that 200. But don't make the mistake of watching the elite athletes and seeing the stuff they're doing in the training hall and thinking, okay, that's a good idea, when in a lot of cases they're kind of getting away in spite of and not necessarily because of. Other than that though, I love his clean. His clean is absolutely beautiful. It's a great example, and one I will be using going forward with athletes when I'm trying to kind of stop over pulling the barbell, get under the barbell faster, and Mr. Cherkin's technique is definitely an example I will be using.
Another thing that I think he's a very good specimen of is the appropriate amount of back development, which is an absolutely massive back on a weightlifter. I think people sometimes forget about it. I think we sometimes lead into the big quads, trying to make your quads and your hips as big as possible to get those big squats in there. But this week, as you're watching the training hall videos, look at the amount of back development that goes on. There's obviously that famous Iron Mind poster from years back saying backs are to weightlifters, or backs are to weightlifters like biceps are to bodybuilders, but it really could not be more true. You want as much mass on your back as possible, and if that means 3 times a week doing some extra back extensions, I really recommend doing it.
Next, we've got Zhang Jinghong, a 45 kilo weightlifter from Team China. She clean and jerked a world record of 113 kilos with a squat jerk, no less. This is about 2.5 times body weight, which is absolutely massive. So in the 45 kilo weight class, very interesting to see her squat jerky as well. We typically didn't really see the Chinese female team doing a lot of squat jerking. Largely, we would have seen that on the male side. But you have to hand it to her just how casually she dominated this 113 kilos for a world record.
I think some perspective really needs to come in here, and this comes from talking to athletes. It comes from programming for athletes, and a lot of the time, if you're a male weightlifter recreationally lifting, you're probably able to clean and jerk this weight or get close to this. To be able to do this at a 45 kilo body weight though is absolutely insane. Just as you watch her set up, you'll see how little muscle mass there is on the frame, how small she is as a person, absolutely tiny arms. Even during the pull, you'll see just how little muscle she has to be able to pull this off, which leads to it being insanely more impressive than I think most of us can kind of conceptualize in our brain. It's the equivalent of me doing a 250 kilo clean and jerk.
Jesus Christ, you're overweight. Next, we've got the return of North Korea as well, and we have Ri Won-ju clean and jerking 190 kilos as a 67 kilo weightlifter. This is his own world record broken, which was 189 kilos. He did this earlier this year in Thailand. The North Korean contingent are somewhat controversial in weightlifting, but they're the exact same as everybody else, to be honest with you. 190 kilos. What's really interesting about this is North Korea's cleans are typically excellent, but they're always let down. As long as I can remember weightlifting, North Korean jerks, ironically, like the South Korean jerks, were very poor, certainly on the men's side. They just couldn't put up those big weights. They could clean anything, massive squats, really strong pulls, serious physicality from them, but they just couldn't follow through with those jerks a lot of the time. But Ri Won-ju's jerk is excellent and it's a great example of that. I wonder if they went after that in particular, did they go a little bit harder on the split jerk side of things to improve it, which they definitely have here, which is a fantastic split jerk.
Look, there's an obvious elephant in the room here with the North Korean team. People say they're not being tested. All I will say is, look, you not being tested is you in the exact same boat as being tested and your testing federation allowing you to compete anyway when you have positive tests. So I honestly don't think there's anybody here holier than thou who can look down on a country like North Korea saying that they're not being tested in competition. If your national governing body is allowing you to get away with positive tests, you're in the exact same boat and your athletes are too.
Speaking of a national governing body letting you get away with tests, I didn't bring up the tab, but Daryl included here when he's editing. You saw a statement came out just towards the end of the summer. I think it was a Reuters investigation, and this is on the WADA website, and you can look at it here. Is essentially the United States Anti-Doping Agency was knowingly letting athletes compete in a variety of different sports for snitching information. It was letting them get away with positive tests, letting them taking away PEDs such as EPO and other substances, letting them retire, and then essentially bullying WADA into not letting them release those names because WADA said it would put their career, I think they said they'd put their life at jeopardy, and so WADA felt that they were pressured not to release this. USADA said that they had WADA's agreement to let this happen. WADA said there was no such precedent and they wouldn't have let this happen. They didn't agree to it, which I think is hilarious. Just as you brought that up, I completely forgot about that. So the holier than thou does not work for anybody. Does not work for anybody. No one is holier than thou.
Obviously, except Irish athletes.
Yeah, well, okay. Let's move on to Iran. Here we've got Yousefi with 260 kilos on the clean and jerk. He is 21 years old. He is an absolute monster. He's competing in Bahrain. I have a hard time comprehending this 263 kilo clean and jerk. The speed of it. This is like when you're kind of new to weightlifting, you have some talent and you're going after a 140 and you're just absolutely sending it. But I did not ever expect to see someone do that with 263 kilos there.
I honestly don't ever remember seeing a barbell move like that.
At 263?
Like the way it's bending as he's pulling on it. It makes absolutely no sense. I feel a great barometer of how mind-blowing something is how often it gets sent in for the news show. Obviously, we had a break last week because we were in the UK. I honestly can't think of anything that's been sent in more times than this clean and jerk has been sent in. It is absurd. It's obviously really caught people's imagination. He's so young. He's so monstrous in the pull. There's no good word to describe what he does to that barbell.
Its technique is interesting, very Iranian. The speed at which he puts into the jerks is crazy. He just goes after those jerks. We saw that 270 kilos, which is outrageous. And this 263 is something else. Considering he's so young, this looks like someone who can clean and jerk plus 270 plus. So the biggest clean jerker of the last couple of years has definitely been Lasha, who clean jerked 270. And we're not really sure how many other people who have done that. But looking at the current athletes, while there's a lot of great snatchers, for example, Gore is one of the best snatchers ever in the super heavyweight class. Isn't that amazing clean and jerker? But this is something else. Will we finally going to see an actual 270 plus on camera? If the Iranians are anything to go by, we'll probably see him actually get an attempt at it. Or, well, he'll do it. Whether we'll see it is another story. But hopefully the social media pressure will let us see it if that ever does happen. So I'd say keep an eye out on that over the next squad. Now, sticking with the Iranians, Rostami posted this 180 kilo snatch, and I don't take any great pleasure in saying I told you so, but he's not competing at Worlds for Kosovo. I was very skeptical that was happen anyway. We were hopeful because we like Rostami as a character. Everyone loves Rostami, I think. And he got back in the crazy shape with this 180, but I don't speak Farsi, so if anyone actually does, let me know what Rostami's saying. But from what I gathered, it's from my broken Farsi. From what I gathered is the Iranian Federation won't release him to Kosovo, so I don't think we're going to see him at Bahrain this year. Maybe we might get a chance next year. Look, he's obviously clearly capable of big weights if he's back to 180.
Yeah.
So
there's two major standouts here. The first thing is just how good that 180 snatch is.
I thought you were going to say just how handsome he is.
3 major standouts. firstly, how good that 180 is. Undoubtedly, this is back to him in peak shape. I have no doubt if he was allowed to compete, we would see some really, really good competition performance. But the second thing, and I'm really getting Lance Armstrong vibes here as they took his 7 Tour de France titles off him, and he tweeted the picture of him with the 7 yellow jerseys on the wall behind him and he's lying on the couch. But this competition hall of medals and trophies behind you as you're complaining about not being able to compete is a vibe.
Well, he never tested positive.
No.
Rostami's never tested positive, so I mean, you know. Now here we've Lee Dain doing CrossFit. We did a demo at the Asian Fitness Championships, so they did a little snatch ladder, but Lee Dain came out and decided to do some muscle snatches. He ended up just repping 100 kilos. Now I know there's a lot of big lifting going on with the Worlds in Bahrain, but it was hard to leave this one out considering how much people love a little Lee Dain footage, and we're no different than anyone else. Very, very easy.
It's so funny to see. There's probably 50 CrossFitters waiting behind the barriers here, waiting to do the workout. And you've got one of the best people in the world just running up, making an absolute fool of the 15 kilo female bears with the nicely loaded plates on them. It has to be some sort of psychological smack in the nuts for those people.
So a lot of people were kind of wondering or are interested to see that China aren't sending their A team or their typical A team. And this isn't new for China. They've often done this after Olympics, where the Worlds the year after typically were somewhat weaker than the final Worlds before the Olympics, which would have mattered more. A lot of times teams would send them, and China would often have tried out new lifters that we might see them for 1 or 2 international competitions and then we'd never see them again. And so China sending their B team to this year's Worlds in Bahrain isn't anything new. And if anything, I was hoping Lee Dain wouldn't go, because he definitely needs some kind of break. He's clearly a talented lifter. Physically, I think he needs a break from the last quad, because he definitely has more to do on a platform, and it'd be a shame to see his career cut short when he's a still very young lifter. So hopefully this little break is good for him and we see him come out of the blocks next year. Now, speaking of the B team for Team China, we've got Pan Yunhua, who is still 18 years old, turning 19 this month. He's competing at the Worlds this year, which we're very happy to see. We've been on Team Pan for a couple of months now, and he's got this 200 kilo clean and jerk in the training hole, which I gotta say I really like his clean. Obviously not huge fans of squat jerkers, but I can appreciate a good squat jerker, but his clean is something else.
This is the major advantage. Aside from giving athletes a break, it also allows for that B team of Chinese athletes to go to large scale competitions. There is a huge amount of international level professional weightlifters training in China. I think if Dr. Steph's numbers are anything to go by, around 1,600 professional male weightlifters in China under their system. So for athletes like that, trying to get to large scale international competitions and gain meaningful experience at those competitions isn't trivial. Like, you really have to work hard to try and get there, and even at that you're probably hoping that one of your comrades gets injured so you get to go to the competition. And in this case, it's the perfect illustration of why you want to be doing this. It obviously gives people like Lee Dain a break, but majorly and importantly, it gives younger athletes coming up that international competition experience, which is invaluable. Lifting weights is obviously the same everywhere you go, but traveling to competitions, making weight at those competitions, the training halls, the warm-up environment is all very, very specific to those larger competitions. And so it is really important that athletes like this get the chance to experience it before they have to step in on a international level scene that's really going to matter.
Here we've got Turkmenistan's Team Bektemur, one of Dara's favourite lifters, and I have to say he is a fantastic lifter to watch, with a pretty casual 180 kilo clean and jerk from him. He's a exceptional lifter, but there's something about his clean in particular that really tickles my fancy, and this is another great example of how precise he is. Something about his technique as well is just so robotic but really fluid. It's like someone programmed the lifter to do a clean.
I've been thinking about this for the last few weeks. Why is this technique, why is this technical model so pleasing to look at? And to be honest, I think it's the exact range of motion he has in every single movement. So you'll see as he catches the clean, he immediately comes to that high front rack position. Then as he finishes out the clean, he immediately goes into the jerk position. So there's no moving around. There's no changing foot position. There's no adjusting the rack. He just immediately, seamlessly transitions from clean to jerk, from pulling on the clean to transitioning underneath, from dipping down to driving back up. Every transition is absolutely perfect, and the range of motion he achieves is supreme. So it's not like he is very restricted where we have those very low elbows and open hands as he goes to jerk. Also, he doesn't seem to have any massive surplus of mobility in certain areas. You'll see a lot of lifters really driving the barbell back behind them. Every position he hits is textbook, and he hits it with great fluidity and just a seamless lift throughout.
You'll notice also he's wearing the Anta 2s, which I'd love to know if they're a good shoe, but still the Minister of Finance is an embargo. The fiscal policy is dire here at Sikistan. So if this video gets 500 likes...
That's not happening.
I'm going to buy the Anta 2. I'm going to steal the company card. So 500 likes and 100 comments. Okay, 500 likes at least. And I'll buy the Anta 2s and do a full review on them. They could be a great squat shoe.
We're not doing it.
No, we're doing it. It's on video now. 500 likes, which is very good for a video. So if anything, it's in our own interest for me to get them to
Can you like a video more than once?
Oh, I will. Next up, we've got the strength section of our new show. We've got John Hack in his little side quest where he's already dominated powerlifting and now he's doing just a little bit of strongman. For the last couple of years, he's dabbled in it. And here at the official strongman games, he did 317.5 kilos or 700 pounds for 9 reps and the axle bar deadlift at 90 kilos body weight. I think the axle bar is a great example for why a couple of centimeters or millimeters of change in bar position can make all the difference for how hard a lift can be. You know, the snatch is a very complicated lift. The clean and jerk are very complicated. But the squat, bench and deadlift require really intelligent and smart training. And maximize your technique is very, very important. The technique might be simple, but the margin for error is quite large, and the room you can leave in your lifts for a couple of extra kilos can be really massive if you're messing up technique. And the deadlift is one that probably gets the least amount of emphasis or thought behind it to the average lifter when they're thinking about the lifts. So you'll think about your squat technique, you'll think about your bench press technique, but when it comes to the deadlift, a lot of lifters are just like, oh, you know, whatever, just kind of grip and rip, just pull really hard, I need to be in good shape. But you can see John, who's an unbelievable deadlifter, a 427 kilo conventional deadlifter. You can see how hard this is and how he has to change his technique slightly on some reps. We saw him changing it slightly on his training reps with the axle bar, because just for those extra few centimeters and millimeters that the barbell is further away from him, it causes you to change that technique in a less favorable fashion. Now, of course, for the event, you have to do it this way or try and do it this way. But for your own deadlifting, do just try and think about the technical positions you're hitting and give the deadlift its technical diligence that it would deserve for you to hit bigger weights.
I feel like I'm beating a dead horse at this point, but how in God's name is John Hack under 100 kilos?
There's no way.
He looks gigantic.
This could be a conspiracy by the industry.
Do pounds weight, is kilo, are they different over there?
They must be different.
Maybe it's the altitude.
Here we've got Sanita squatting 318 kilos. So this is the heaviest raw squat any female has ever done. Now, this isn't in competition, but this is just the heaviest squat I know of any female ever doing. There's been some heavier squats in equipped powerlifting, but as far as raw squatting, which is just a belt and knee sleeves, this is the heaviest one ever, and 318 kilos. She's been on a tear for the last couple of months, well, last couple of years realistically, building up to this, but this is a massive squat, 701 pounds. It's a nice number in a 700 pound squat.
Gareth, I'm honestly flabbergasted. What in God's name is going on?
Bamboozled,
mind blown, insanely impressive squat. We've talked about her technique previously on the new show. Very, very good, very applicable for what she's trying to do. But 318 kilos is the headline thing to think about here. This is absurdly heavy.
So the tested and untested is 311 kilos. She's hitting 318 kilos here, which is absolutely massive. Now, speaking of someone who's massive, we've got Shane Hunt deadlifting 320 kilos or 705 pounds, first set of 8 on the conventional deadlift. Shane has been on a massive cut recently, which you can see by the striations in his shoulder, or the separation in his shoulder, and him just being a lot leaner. Now, he was like 140 odd kilos, and he was pretty lean at 140 odd kilos, but now he is getting very close to being absolutely dick skin shredded. He's a very strong lifter. I know he's had some issues with injuries the last year or so I think his idea was losing weight might help him heal up a little bit better. Certainly, one of his best lifts is the deadlift, and this is amazing at 110 odd kilos body weight.
What I really like when you see those high rep deadlifts, we just saw them with John Hack, obviously we're looking at Shane's here, is you see where people really have to focus on those later reps. You'll see them taking that small bit of extra time. You'll see where that technical degradation is happening at reps 6, 7 and 8, and where they're really having to focus on it. It's very interesting from a coaching standpoint as you see more and more of these, as you see more and more people and their higher volume work, where the breakdown starts to happen. And certainly if you're a strength training person or a power lifter, or you're just somebody who does deadlifts for their sport, looking at people in the last few reps of their high volume work will give you a great indication of where you might need to be working on it as well. So you'll notice if somebody as talented as Shane Hunt is getting their knees immediately shooting back as they start pulling off the floor, or they're losing the upper body or upper back position, in those cases, they're probably areas you should be looking at too. Obviously, you don't need to go to 320 kilos, and you definitely don't need to do it for 8, but it is a great coaching and training tool for yourself to be able to see where the elites in the sport are breaking down, and maybe that's where you could be adding in some extra accessories.
Now onto the athlete section of the new show. We've got possibly one of the greatest rugby players ever. Definitely one of them. Some people might even say he's the greatest, but that would come down to a lot of national pride. And for example, a lot of...
I would mean Brian O'Driscoll didn't have to exist.
Yeah, so, you're not going to get that. But he's undoubtedly an incredible rugby player. But this kind of, the Quade Cooper pass has been sometimes called this absolutely gargantuan pass here. It looks like 30 odd meters from Antoine Dupont. And this is something that just kind of... I don't even know how to describe how entertaining this is. If you like rugby, this is something you'll instantly just be impressed by. This is something that's going to immediately just be providing a little bit of happiness when you watch this. How nice is this?
So he's standing on his own 10 meter line, and he's throwing it past the halfway line, then past the 10 meter line, and I think the guy who receives the ball is standing on the 22. So half the field is 50 meters minus 22 is 32 meters plus the extra 10, so it's a 42 meter pass. And this kind of stuff is absurd. I think a lot of the time it's used as people just run out on the field and they're throwing a ball around, and someone might have a name of having one of these insane backdoor passes, or they might do a really good one-handed Shazam or something. But in the case of someone like Antoine Dupont, you're going to see a skill like this probably not utilized to this distance, right? Or probably not utilized very, very often. But this is certainly the case where, as a defender, you have to have it in your mind that he can pull off a 42 meter pass out the back door without necessarily having too much pressure on him. It is insane.
It's no mistake, it's no coincidence that Antoine Dupont is absolutely a unit as well. The power he's put into this throw, you have to correlate that a little bit with just how much of a unit he is, how jacked he is, how strong his upper body is. A lot of times when we think of throws like this, or we think of rugby, when we think of strength training, we're looking at power production, we're looking at taking or giving hits, running fast, good position, scrummaging, rocking. But you also can't forget that upper body power is really important part of throwing fire like this if you want to make something like this happen. Now, whether that's a good idea in the game is up to you and your coach, but having the ability to do this is, of course, part one, technique being a huge part, but also just having a lot of upper body musculature and power is a very important part of this. Sticking with rugby, we have Rory Sutherland benching 180 kilos for 5 reps. We were talking a couple of weeks ago about some of the All Blacks benching around 180. Most of the team, certainly most of the forwards, were benching 180 odd kilos, whether that was for 1 reps or multiple reps, and it's something we've seen quite frequently. Whereas if you're a forward, you're 100 plus kilos and you're an elite international rugby player, there's a good chance you have the capacity to move 180 kilos in some fashion or another on the bench press. Maybe not for 5 reps like this, but it's a very, very common trait we've had some very good players under our books, and they've also been able to move 180, be it for 1 rep or a few reps across the board. Now, if you're 75 kilos, you're Cheslin, you're playing for South Africa, you're probably not going to move 180 like this, but a lot of players are going to move like this. And it's something that you see Instagram commenters in rugby, for example, and they're like, that's not true. And you're like, that literally is true. In this video, we're watching most of the All Black team bench 180, or several international rugby players all benching 180 kilos. Did they not happen? Was it imaginary? Did I make that up in my head? Was it not real?
And I think where the problem lies is, a lot of the time, when people like this are commenting on videos, they're thinking that the people around them, or maybe the players they're talking about, need to focus more on their rugby, right? In which case it could be true. When you've an elite international level player who is already thinking about the rugby and already a phenomenal player and probably on the field 5 times per week, then clearly they need to be pushing the strength numbers up as well. So obviously, if you have a 14-year-old who can't catch or pass a ball, or in this case, can't scrummage effectively or has no idea how to tackle well, yes, maybe they should be focusing on something else. But if someone like Rory Sutherland is here and is able to absolutely smash people in tackles, can do his job effectively on the field and really, really well, then clearly they should be pushing their strength numbers as hard as they possibly can. Look at all the teams that are successful around the world. They are all big, strong, powerful people. It's not that that's the only element of their game they train. It's not the only focus of their overall rugby development, but it's a major aspect of it.
Here we've got Kim Sung-Gwan from Team South Korea Wrestling. You've seen him before doing some hill sprints on the new show. And here he is back squatting over double body weights with one of his opposing competitors for what I have to say are some very legitimate reps. If he was doing this with a barbell on his back, they would be very, very strong reps on the back squat. Kim is part of a very strong wrestling team with South Korea. It's also a very strong judo team. We've had the good fortune of being in their national training facility where they do their S&C, and it is an enormous building entirely dedicated to the Olympic teams doing their S&C work, and they're very, very diligent with their programs. They're very smart with their programming. They like traditional strength conditioning for all kinds of their athletes. We're talking about back squats, rows, pressing, hard conditioning, and this is a good manifestation of that. These are legitimate back squats. So this is over double body weight, no warm up, or well, he's probably warm from wrestling, but these are moving.
You know, the other thing that you don't even think about here, he's wearing wrestling shoes and he's standing on a rubber sponge, essentially.
Yeah.
And he's still able to do it. You'll see he moves one of his feet after the first or second rep, but he's still able to secure the load. And that's only what comes along with being incredibly strong if you're training with a barbell on your back or you're following standard strength conditioning programs. If you're a wrestler or if you're doing any of the kind of grappling sports, and a lot of the time people will think, oh, I'll get enough of that strength adaptation that comes along from just training. It really doesn't come along. Like, you're not going to get this by just picking up your friends and moving them around, or by sparring or by grappling or whatever it is. You're going to have to be in the gym. You're going to have to be following some sort of structured programming like they do in South Korea to develop the ability to do something as absurd as this.
So I hope you enjoyed today's news show, and I hope you enjoyed the little break last week. We were away in London and we were moving the office, so we didn't get a chance to do the news show. So we're back again nice and consistent all the way into next year. So hope you're having a great training block, and if you're winding down for Christmas, don't be lazy, don't wind down, keep training. No one said you were allowed to take a break.
If you can suggest any background ideas for what could go on here, please drop them down in the comments below.
Thanks for watching.